It's important to study history so that you don't get complacent about your own time, so that you realize that some of the issues and some of the issues that you're facing have been presenting themselves to people your age earlier on in time with different ways of dealing with them, of course, slightly different choices, but in many cases the same issues. So a lot of what we're facing today is not new, and it helps you be aware of the complexity of society, of culture, of issues of citizenship, of choices, and those are reasons why studying history is important, apart from being fun.
Yah, I believe he just has us in the window of time, y'all. I'm telling you. We are in a moment in time right now where things that have been covered up, he's beginning to reveal those things to his people. And I just thank you so much for being a part of this journey as we uncover these things that ultimately is going to help all of us and help us piece together these things that Satan has come in and fractured, especially as us as a people. You know, our history, as you know, has been very fractured. And so even doing the research of this video, it's been very challenging to kind of piece these things together because it's so fractured. You know, you got to read, you got to piece things together the best way you can and just really lean on his ruach, his spirit, for guidance, because you just, at the end of the day, what I want to do, not just with this video, but with all my videos, I want to just simply put all the truth that I can find on the table, because I understand, like the word says, that we know in part and we prophesy in part. So I know for myself, I don't know it all. But what I want to do is at least let me put the pieces that I was able to recover in this massive excavation that we're all part of. And I want to put that on the table, put my pieces on the table, and maybe you see some things like, oh yeah, well, I got these pieces too. And you put yours on the table, and maybe some of them will fit and all that, and we can just go from there. So we're going to start with a quick look at what happened in Israel in 70 AD. Now, many of you guys are already familiar and well aware of that, but we're just going to do, just for the sake of just making sure we cover all of our bases and making sure everybody's on the same page.
This is a story of terrorists and political assassination, of brutal overlords who crucified thousands, and of the siege of Jerusalem with over 100,000 people trapped inside. But it is also the story of how, amid the chaos, two new religions began to flower. Religions that would change mankind's ideas about justice, mercy, and God.
Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. So they took Yahshua and led him away. These statements made by the Jews really showed how far Israel strayed away from Elohim. First they said his blood was on their hands and on the hand of their children. And when Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." They proclaimed a heathen Gentile emperor over the king that the Most High sent for them. This is bad news. They laid hold of a certain man, Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Yahshua. And a great multitude of the people followed him, and the women who also mourned and lamented him. But Yahshua, turning to them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming, in which they will say, Blessed are the barren, wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in the greenwood, what will be done in the dry?"
When Roman troops rushed into Jerusalem, the capital of Judea, they were unaware that they were about to meet the most extraordinary people they had ever tried to conquer.
It is estimated that about 600,000 Yehudim, or in history books it will say the Jews, were killed by Rome. Those who survived either managed to escape to places like Africa, sent as slaves throughout the empire, or sent to their deaths in the Roman games.
Just offer a pinch of incense. By the gods, if you people aren't stubborn.
I will not.
Take her away. One less slave. No, or a baby makes two. I take it the husband will want the same fate.
It is the living God that we serve.
Make that 3 less slaves in Carthage. Then you shall go to your living God as a dead man. Bring the next one.
Next point, with the defeat of the Moors who ruled in places like Spain and Portugal, these individuals were flushed out and either headed deeper into Europe, Northern Africa, or Western Africa, where they were ultimately sold into slavery. All right, next point. So this is the Catholic Church's slavery timeline. And the Catholic Church, I mean, if you do a search on slavery in the Catholic Church, they will, of course, they're going to paint a much different picture. Yes, they will admit to being involved in the slave trade, but it'll be something like, well, we just had that moment where we just realized, oh, this is not for us, and, it doesn't make God, God happy and all this stuff, whatever.
Sisters and brothers, most especially descendants who have traveled so far to be with us. Today, the Society of Jesus, who helped to establish Georgetown University and whose leaders enslaved and mercilessly sold your ancestors, stands before you to say that we have greatly sinned in our thoughts and in our words, in what we have done, and in what we have failed to do. We pray with you today because we have greatly sinned and because we are profoundly sorry. It is our very enslavement of another, our very ownership of another, culminating in the tragic sale of 272 women, men, and children that remains with us to this day, trapping us in an historic truth for which we implore mercy and justice, hope and healing. We betrayed the very name of Jesus, for whom our least society is named. Now, nearly 200 years later, we know that we cannot heal from this tragic history alone.
But the truth be told, the Catholic Church from its onset has always been involved in some form of slavery, and bankrolled it, encouraged it, used the Bible to justify it. The Catholic Church and slavery are one and the same. And so same thing with Rome too. So when you hear Catholic Church, the Catholic Church and Rome are one and the same. So even though the Catholic Church may not have been in existence, Rome was. And so when the Catholic Church came into existence, they just took all the belief systems of Rome and just put it under something, and they called it church and just rolled with it.
For over 1,000 years, the Empire of Rome ruled the Western world. People of all races and nationalities swore allegiance to Caesar, the Roman Emperor, and most powerful man in the world. History tells us the Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. But did it really? Founded by Caesar Constantine, is the Roman Catholic Church really the new Roman Empire? And if so, is the Roman Emperor, Caesar, now the Pope? If this is true, then it would be the greatest corporate takeover in history. Our Roman senators, now called cardinals, Roman governors, now archbishops. Are Vestal versions nuns? Is the imperial chair of Jupiter, where Caesar sat, now called the throne of St. Peter? The Emperor of Rome ruled the Western world. Does the Pope now have the same power? Was the Christian settlement of the New World the Roman Empire's conquest of America? Does the Pope rule over the United States of America? The world? Conspiracy theory? Heretical? Satanic? You decide.
Okay, so that's really how the Catholic Church came to be. This is a quick look at the timeline. I'm not, like I said again, I'm not going to read all of this, but we'll just cover some of it, okay? But just to give you an idea. And it says Pope Martin I condemns people who teach slaves about freedom or who encourages them to escape. 1179 AD, the Third Lateran Council imposes slavery on those helping the Saracens. 1493, Pope Alexander I guess that's the 6th, authorizes the King of Spain to enslave non-Christians of the Americas who were at war with the Christian powers. Let's see, 1500 to 1850 AD, the vast majority of these slaves worked in the Catholic colonies of Spain and Portugal. 12 million Africans arrived in the Americas to toil as slaves. The vast majority of these slaves worked in the Catholic colonies of Spain and Portugal. Since its beginning, the Catholic Church has been all the way in when it comes to slavery, particularly as it relates to black folks. Okay, so that's that slide. Both of these countries had their own trade routes, which includes parts of West Africa. So I didn't have the map here, but if you can kind of imagine with me for a moment, if you look at the west coast of Africa and kind of trace your finger up the coast until you leave Africa, until you start getting to Europe, one of the first places you're going to hit is going to be Spain and Portugal. Well, draw a line from Spain and Portugal down the coastline of the Western Africa continent, go loop around South Africa. Then you're going to find yourself on the eastern side of the continent of Africa. And then you can just draw a line going to India and some of the places around there. Well, that is pretty much was the trade route of these two countries. Well, they were also doing trade with West Africa. West Africa was part of that, part of their route. And this is before slavery. So they were, one of the things that Western Africa was known for was gold. So they would gold and, they would get gold and then, they would do all the other trading and stuff, whatever they were trading with. But they were doing that. So Africa was definitely on the map, so to speak, during those years leading up to full-blown the slave trade. And so on those ships, though, even prior to slavery, you had, this is our next point, priests were oftentimes part of the crew of the Spanish and Portuguese ships. And what you'll find is that these Jesuit priests, they weren't just on there just, okay, anybody need prayer? Hey, it wasn't like that. They were part of the crew. One of the sources I was reading, they were saying these, when these two countries began to evolve into full-blown slavery, the same holds below deck that would hold the gold and all the spices and whatever else they would get during trading. Now they had slaves under there. And then they said right above that on the top deck, you had the crew, and it was uncommon. It was not uncommon for them to be having mass or engaged in prayer above on the top deck, while you got slaves sweating on top of each other, chained down to the deck and all that. And meanwhile, they're praying to their Christian God. This was not uncommon. But priests were a viable part of the crew, not so much just for the spiritual stuff, but they were also, what would happen is once they would dock in these different port cities, the priests would go into these cities and kind of gather and collect information. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The Vatican experts, and this is from the book, excerpt from the book, Slavery and Catholicism. It's written by Richard Roscoe Miller. All right. The Vatican experts are de facto members or advisors of a species of Security Council, universal rather than national, who evaluate for the Pope a vast amount of information gathered by the oldest, the largest, and probably the best intelligence service in the world. Okay, this is leading to something, y'all. Okay, so just keep that in mind. They were probably the best intelligence service in the world. I'm being like your teachers back in the day. They would say something and they will repeat it because they're trying to get you to remember it, okay? All right, so I'm gonna read that one more time. The largest and probably the best intelligence service in the world. The methods and traditions evolved by the bishops of the church during religious and political conflicts of past centuries constitute a precious reservoir of experience in observing, interpreting, and reporting facts and feelings, events, and trends. Since well before the start of the Cold War, the Vatican has had special institutions for the training of specialists in Eastern affairs. It has been steadily developing and improving a network of sources of information on which the Holy See, or the Pope, has based the strategy and tactics of its constant struggle against communism. So these priests, they were part of this intelligence service. So you think about for a second when people who, when priests, one of the roles they have is to listen to the confession of people who have sinned. And so they're not just listening to this and that's it. They're collecting that information, they're passing it on to Rome, and they're keeping files on you. So, it's a shame you have millions of people all around the world who think they're just talking to somebody and just confessing and that's it. But in reality, that person on the other side of that screen is actually writing all this stuff down, taking note of it. And if it's something worthy, they'll pass it on up to Rome. Okay, next one. What the priests encountered. Okay, this is what they encountered when they came into Africa. These Christians believed in the perpetuity of the law of God and observed the Sabbath on the fourth commandment. Churches that held to this faith and practice existed in Central Africa and among the Armenians of Asia. So these priests, while they were on these ships, and like I said, they would get off on these towns and they exploring and all that, while they were, walking around, they exploring, understanding the cultures and all that stuff, the customs and all that, and the language and all that. They're absorbing all this in, and then they started noticing when they got to this part of Africa, they see these group of people, they call them Christians, because understand, if you're a Catholic and you live by the word, by the Bible, right? Well, that's all you know when you see somebody else doing the same thing. But it was this one part that kind of was like, it's a little different. And that was the fact that they celebrated the Sabbath Saturday. Where Catholic Church, it was like we talked about in an earlier video when Constantine came in, he said, I want to do away with all of that. We're not doing the Sabbath on those Saturday. I don't want to have anything to do with the Yehudim.
Saturday in the Zulu language means the day of completion or the last day. And what I find very fascinating is that they had these concepts of the Sabbath long before the arrival of the European missionaries. Long before the arrival of the European missionaries.
The missionaries were the ones who brought Sunday worship. The missionaries were the ones who brought Sunday worship. And up until that time, everyone knew God had only one day of worship, and it is Saturday.
And black folk treat Sunday like it's dad.
Mercy. Mercy.
Not realizing how they got it. The Europeans changed the day and then came here. They brought Sunday with them. Then they sent a boat over there and got y'all. And y'all came here. White man came on boat, brought Sunday on boat, brought black man on boat, everybody in same boat. White man made slave of black man. Let him rest a half a day Sunday. He was so glad for that little rest, he began to associate that rest with Sunday. Pretty soon he started singing, ain't it a shame to work on Sunday? Ain't it a shame? You know us, we got a song for everything. Now you got a song for the wrong day. Some Negro got overly happy and come talking about every day will be Sunday. By and back, I let you lie. You singing a lie. Every day ain't gonna be no Sunday. Our ancestors preserved the Sabbath. Shabbath, Shabbaton, Sabbaton, Saturday, seventh day, the day that was hung into creation, last day of the week.
You know, so we're going to do away with all that. We are going to have our Sabbath on Sunday because we worship the sun on Sunday. And so, but when these priests, when they saw that, they were like, hold up. These are Christians, but that Sabbath thing, I got to tell Rome about this. So, and that's what they did. So let's get to the next slide. Now, this is from a different book. Fast forward just a tiny bit, and this is how they responded. And the response was, let's enslave them. You ain't going to submit to us. We're going to enslave your behinds. Anyway, in the early 17th century, it became customary for slaves in Africa to be baptized before their departure from Africa. This requirement was first laid down by King Philip III of Spain, second of Portugal, in 1607 and confirmed in 1619. The slaves had, as a rule, received no instruction whatsoever before the ceremony, and many, perhaps most of them, had no previous indication that there was such a thing as a Christian God. Again, they're rolling up into Africa to these Hebrews because that's who they were, and many of them were at least. And they were like, man, you got that backwards collar on and you got all that foolishness on. We don't know nothing about that. You know, so it was foreign to them. In Luanda, the captives would be taken to one of the 6 churches or assembled in the main square. An official catches a slave, say, who spoke Kimbudu, the language of Luanda, would address the slaves on the nature of their Christian transformation. Then a priest would pass among the bewildered ranks, giving to each one a Christian name which had earlier been written on a piece of paper. He would also sprinkle salt on the tongues of the slaves and follow that with holy water. Finally, he might say through an interpreter, consider that you are now children of Christ. You are going to set off for Portuguese territory where you will learn matters of faith. Listen to this part now. Never think any more of your place of origin. Do not eat dogs, do not eat rats or horses. Be content. Sickening stuff. But you hear what he just said. Never think any more of your place of origin. So they wiped out their place of origin. They gave them Christian names. They renamed them. And they sold them into slavery. That was the response of Rome. So let's continue. This is a video that I actually found on YouTube. And it's a part of this video I actually showed on a previous video. But this part here I never showed you guys before. But it goes right along with what we just read. And you're able to visually see what these slaves encountered right before they were sold into slavery. So let me go ahead and turn this up so you can hear it, and just give me one moment, okay?
To begin to understand what they endured, we're driving 1 hour south of Angola's capital, Luanda.
Because this was the house of a slave trader, which now the country's turned into their National Slave Museum, and we're going to meet the director. Hello, how are you?
Hello.
I'm Henry Louis Gates. This is Chris Tucker.
How you doing? Prazer. Nice to meet you.
We're all aware of the dreadful horrors of the Middle Passage, but according to Dr. Aray'Al, a slave's suffering began long before that.
Tinha tratamentos horríveis. Muitos acabavam por morrer ao longo da caminhada. Iam à força, iam tirar do navio à força, e outros preferiam suicidar-se do que ir. São grilhetas para aprisionar os escravos.
How do they tighten it up? They squeeze it something?
How did they
I know. They put this on afterwards. Just take this lock off and slide that out, and you put your hands in first.
Put your hand in there
and slide it in.
But man, look how tight your hands would have been in there.
Yeah.
One of the most chilling aspects of this museum, however, is that it was once a chapel, a reminder that slavery was once seen as being good for an African soul.
Portanto, os escravos entravam por aí assim naquela porta.
Over there.
E vinham. O padre recebia-os por sua vez.
So they would kneel there?
Sim.
The slaves would come in the door, they would kneel in front of the crucifix.
E passavam por aí assim, vinham.
So we march over.
A capela.
Oh, I see, the holy one.
Pia batismal.
So they were brought in here and baptized.
Sim. Curvava bocadinho, água na cabeça e fazia
They put water on his head and he make the sign of the cross. They would bless them and then take the boats were out here?
Yes.
Chris, they would bless you before they sent you to your death.
What's wrong?
Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you, brother. See, and how could this place so peaceful and calm? This was the site of the bloodiest industry and trade in human history, African slave trade. I don't think that I could have made it from the interior to here, the 2 or 3 month walking journey. I mean, think about that. Before we even got on this torture chamber they called a slave ship.
So as you can see, you guys, again, this is what these Africans had to go through. Again, this is a legacy of Christianity, where they were, these Africans were stolen out of their country, taken out of their country. They were stripped of their names. They were told to forget where they came from and basically sold into slavery, and sent, all points west of there, which was like the Caribbean, South America, and in the United States as well. So, okay, so now we are going to do this ship that we're on is going to start turning just a little bit, okay? So, because we're moving away now from Africa, and now we're slowly getting into modern times, okay? The Roman Catholic Church, that's the title. Although the CIA began as a mostly Protestant organization, Roman Catholics quickly became to dominate the new covert action wing in 1948. As you can see, it makes sense. Here you have the Roman Catholic Church got these Jesuit priests all over the world collecting information on everybody, every culture, every trend all over the world. So it makes sense that it would be a perfect fit for covert agencies all around the world. So let's continue. All were staunchly conservative, fiercely anti-communist, and socially elite. There were several reasons for this influx of Catholic elites. First, Wisner, himself a Wall Street lawyer, had an extensive and glamorous circle of friends to recruit from. Second, Italy was in constant crisis in the 1940s, both during World War II and after. Throughout this troubled period, the American intelligence community's greatest ally in Italy was the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church, of course, is one of the most anti-communist organizations in the world. The Marxist doctrine of atheism threatens Catholic theology and its equality threatens the church's strict tradition of hierarchy and authoritarianism. I mess up on that word all the time, y'all, but please forgive me. Anyway, when Hitler invaded communist Russia, the Vatican openly approved. Jesuit Michael Serafian wrote, "It cannot be denied that Pope Pius, let's see, that's the 5th, 6th, 7th, closest advisors for some time regarded Hitler armored divisions as the right hand of God." So as you can see, Catholics have played and continue to play to this day a critical role within organizations such as the CIA. A lot of times, and the way you're able to see is a lot of times, and this is not just in the CIA, but in government, in high places in government, a lot of these people oftentimes graduate from Jesuit-based schools, Jesuit schools like it could be Georgetown or University of Pennsylvania. I think has some foundings and rooted in Catholicism. It's there, but it's not as obvious as one would think. And there are many other colleges and universities all across the United States that have a Catholic foundation to them. And what you'll find is, particularly in the intelligence community, a lot of those individuals have come out of that school and were Jesuit trained. So, and it's the same thing as and it continues even to this day. That wasn't just a past tense thing. It still happens even to this day. They kept on to their grip when it comes to the intelligence gathering, because as we discussed, the Catholic Church is set up to gather intelligence, with those confessionals and all that stuff. It's set up to gather intelligence from all over the world. It's automatically set up for that. Okay, this is a very fascinating book in that it goes into a lot of the musicians that came up in the 60s, all those like that contribute to the hippie movement. Many of those people, and they show you in this book, many of those people, those musicians, were the children of not just people who were in the military, but their parents were oftentimes in the intelligence part of the military. And they show you right in the book. It traces, and you could double check it to make sure it's legit, and it's legit. Many of these musicians, their parents were in the intelligence community. So it's almost like a thing now with the intelligence community. It's so sick, they train their kids to be an arm or a tool for the purposes of this dark government, and it talks about how they were basically an extension of the intelligence community. And let me see if the next one here. So one of the things they would use, like I said, is psychedelic programming. Again, we're getting into MK Ultra now. LSD, in a nutshell, basically is a drug that, and I'll just say it, give my definition of it. It allows you to hallucinate. The person who takes LSD, they'll hallucinate, but it also opens them up to the spiritual realm. And a lot of people who take these hallucinogenic drugs, one of the things they always say is, oh man, the colors, dude, the colors, and they talk about all these different colors and different things they see. They become just more aware of their surroundings, and so that brought on what you see in front of you. When you see these psychedelic paintings, I can't even look at these paintings straight up. Like if you ever looked at some of these paintings, they're very troubling. They're very disturbing. But it's what these people see when they're taking these drugs. When you start really looking into the CIA, they're not just about intelligence gathering, but they have also not just dabbled in, but invested greatly into the occult. So they're very familiar with the supernatural. So don't make no mistake about it. They are very familiar with it. And so they've used drugs and pharmakia, for that matter, to get people to a place where they can be controlled. And so, but there's a difference that I noticed, and I'm gonna touch on this next one. how they went after white people versus black people. And if you look at here, I mean, if you ever seen some of the video footage of the Woodstock and you see the people dancing, y'all, I'm just gonna talk plain. I mean, you ain't gonna see no black folks do this kind of stuff. I'm sorry. I mean, you just look at some of this right here. I mean, they butt necking in a circle. I mean, come on. And how they would just be dancing and all that, and just all that. And then and there's some now with this one thing I noticed as I was looking at this stuff. I said, you know, my daughter and I, we like looking at fail videos. That's just our low rent comedy that, you know, that's free, that we like looking at. And but if you look at those videos, the vast majority of people in those videos are white folks. I mean, they will do things like, yeah, I'm gonna jump upside down with a rope tied around my ankle off of a bridge. Now, black folks don't do that kind. It's certain things we just don't do.
O óculos, cuidado!
Oh, Jesus!
I mean, we talk about that and make fun of that, but psychiatrists have noticed that stuff for years, y'all, and they want to tap into that stuff. Well, during this time, during the hippie movement, they used a combination of rock music and drugs and all that because they knew, they just said, hey, this is how we're going to reach these white kids, basically, okay? But what were we as black folks, what were we doing during that time? And here's a video. Okay, it's a short clip. It's quite interesting. This is a video I saw many years ago. I think it's called Berkeley in the 60s. Black folks, we weren't doing that kind of stuff. You didn't see us. I mean, now there was some black hippies out there, don't get me wrong, but I mean, we weren't doing that kind of stuff. I'm sorry. I mean, we were not doing that kind of stuff, all right? But in the same time period, while they were doing all that drug testing, this is what black folks were doing for the most part.
In the streets of Oakland, a few miles from the Berkeley campus, the Black Panthers came forward as the cutting edge of black power. Their militancy had a magnetic effect on the student movement.
We want the Panthers to be our friends. We want to follow their lead in some fashion that's confusing, that's mysterious, all we are aware of. We want to go black and white together into some positive future against the oppressor who is feeling ever more oppressive. The Panthers exercised a heavy influence in the imagination of the white left, partly because the white left was confused about who it was and what it ought to do. They were fascinated by this tough macho image, and they followed it. Not so much willfully, but involuntarily, because it was the projection out there of the thing in their own actions that thrilled them most.
Bring it on. If you want war, let there be war. This is what we're saying. Is that clear?
In other words, if he is convicted and sentenced to death, Oakland will erupt.
This whole country is going to erupt, is what we're telling you. We're going to do everything that we can to see to it that the whole world erupts. Isn't that clear?
The Panthers seemed even crazier than they were because they were playing the media, and the media was loving them. The media picked up their current, fed the narrowest parts of their image back to us in the most dramatic hype terms that the Panthers themselves wanted them to be projected. It drove the police crazy. The police were furious, wanted to get them all over the country. And it drove some of us, it incited some of us with superficial fantasies of a kind of revolution that was completely inappropriate, had nothing to do with the actual landscape possibility. It was interesting to me more deeply and metaphorically, if that was what they were doing, what was appropriate in our community?
Anyway, so you can see he's probably still on that stuff, but I think he passed away. But as you can see, black folks during that same period, not all of us, but we were at war. You know what I'm saying? We're not in the middle of the field dancing and not a care in the world. let me just say, we weren't doing that kind of stuff. We were about war, and this plays right into who we are as a people. As this guy here, he was a protester back then. What he was saying is basically at that time, a lot of these white organizations, these white movements, they were really going nowhere because they would just head in the clouds or whatever. But when they saw those Panthers, that it was like a structure. It called people to attention. You guys, that's something that is Yah given. He's given to that ability to us as a people. When we walk in, when we're right, when we're together, when we got our stuff together, we bring attention to the place. That it was like a structure. It called people to attention. You guys, that's something that is Yah given. He's given to that ability to us as a people. When we walk in, when we're right, when we're together, when we got our stuff together, we bring attention. But there's something that Yah has given us, his people, to when we come together, it brings things to attention. And that's what he was talking about here. He was saying, like I said again, a lot of these white movements, they really weren't going anywhere until the Black Panthers came into play, and they were like, okay, we need to fold in under them and use them as our battering ram, so to speak, so we can get some of these other things that we're marching for heard. So anyway, let me see the next thing. So anyway, getting back to Laurel Canyon. Laurel Canyon is located in Southern California, not too far from Hollywood. And little do a lot of people know that there was actually a military base right there in the canyon. As you can see, like out, let me see if you can see my mouse here. Hold on. Here we go. Like all around here, these are houses. Well, in these houses and all in this valley, a lot of those rock stars and stuff, and a lot of big whatnots in the Hollywood scene at that time, near Sunset Strip and all that, they lived all in here. So how convenient for the intelligence community to have a base right here. And they said it was used to create propaganda films, the military, for the military. Like they would create films that, about the, Russia may drop the big one and all this other stuff. And they had access to Hollywood, the resources of Hollywood, so it made sense for the base to be there, right in the valley. So that's the purpose of this base here. Okay, so this is kind of how they were going after everything I talked about up to this point in this section of our discussion here. Is mainly the intelligence community and how they went after to program the white generation, the white community, so to speak, the white youths.
Take care of Alex, please. We don't want her joining the Scientologists.
But the intelligence community also had another plan. And they said, okay, this is how we need to go after these white people, but what about these black people?
Jim Jones was a preacher who promised his followers heaven on earth. Instead, in a jungle in South America, he gave them death.
Jim had the deepest, darkest eyes, and if you would watch him and listen to him, he could convince you of a lot of things. He had a strange power.
He felt power. He saw how the people worshipped him, and he just simply believed that he was, quote, God, unquote.
The most important thing to Jim Jones was that his name go down in history as a socialist revolutionary.
He was consumed by a sense of outrage at the injustices that he saw. I think that propelled him, in a sense, into madness, in a sense, into corruption.
There is no question that Jim Jones will have a place in Western history, whether we like it or not.
Jim Jones, even though like Jonestown, if you're not familiar with that whole incident didn't take place until 78. Jim Jones was around a lot longer than that, obviously. So his movement, so to speak, started right around 1970-ish or whatever. When he started being known as a what he's known to be. So let's cover some of the highlights here real quick. And I said, who is Jim Jones' mainstream media version? He was according to the mainstream media, he was a community preacher who cared about the poor. Jim Jones used to hang out with the now governor, Jerry Brown, Moonbeam Brown. That's what they call him, because he was a hippie back then or whatever. He got himself together. Jerry Brown is also Jesuit trained. He came out of the Catholic Church. He's probably still Catholic. And anyway, eventually, this is the next point. Eventually, both he and his followers went mad and committed suicide by drinking Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. Now, at this point of the discussion, you may be saying, okay, what the slavery? You went all around Robbins Barn. You know, you talking about slavery and the Catholic Church and all that. Well, just hold tight, y'all, because this thing's about to come with a southpaw on you if you just hang on them. Okay, so now we get on to when Jones, you know, he was in Brazil, you know, basically at an undisclosed kind of CIA location, getting training down there. This is all sourced. Again, you just scroll down, the numbers are there. You can scroll down to the bottom of this document and you'll be able to find the source of all this stuff. With his new wealth, Jones was able to travel to California and establish the first People's Temple in Ukiah, California in 1965. Okay, guarded by dogs, electric fences, and guard towers, he set up Happy Haven's Rest Home. Okay, despite a lack of trained personnel or proper licensing, Jones drew in many people at the camp. He had elderly, prisoners, people from psychiatric institutions, and 150 foster children, often transferred to care at Happy Havens by court orders. He was contacted there by Christian missionaries from World Vision, okay, an international evangelical order that had done some espionage work for the CIA in Southeast Asia. Okay, do some research on World Vision. I remember my mom used to give to them a lot. I mean, I remember seeing those letters come every month. But little did we know that that was a front for the CIA. Y'all, it's something here. Now, remember now, as I'm talking about the CIA, remember what I was saying earlier. Their close connections with the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, they were pretty much founded on that.
An astonishing admission by the Roman Catholic Church. They run the CIA. Did you know the CIA is also dubbed Catholic Intelligence Agency? Catholics in Action. Is the CIA truly American? For decades, Jesuit affiliates of the Roman Catholic Church have directed the CIA. Leon Panetta and John Brennan, the current director, are Jesuit trained. Are Jesuits today the same as Jesuits of the past? Are you familiar with the Jesuit oath? Its devious plans to control the wealth of the nations, enslave the masses, and depopulate the world. Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Should we be alarmed that the institution the Pope heads also controls the CIA? The CIA's mission is to identify and destroy terrorists and fundamentalists. Pope Francis likewise, and defines them as those who believe in absolute truth, end-time prophecies of Daniel and the Revelation, refuse to yield their liberty of conscience and give up constitutional rights. The insidious agenda of the Jesuits will soon be realized, as Pope Francis has been hailed Lord of the world and Savior of the earth.
What does CIA stand for?
The Central Intelligence Agency.
That is correct. That is what the CIA stands for. Now, do you know what the primary job of the CIA is?
I think their primary job would be similar to the police force, but more the head of law enforcement.
Now, Marianne, what is the primary job of the CIA?
I believe it has to do with foreign intelligence.
The CIA is the foreign spying agency for America.
That is also correct. Now, they collect, analyze, evaluate, and disseminate foreign intelligence in order to help make decisions that relate to national security. So you're right.
So, Jerome, can you guess what religious group has predominantly run the CIA?
I would assume Christians or Catholics.
Now, can you guess what religious group has predominantly run the CIA?
I'm going to assume or guess the Catholic religion.
That is correct. Why do you guess that?
because I figured that they might have a lot of involvement with the CIA.
Now, the CIA has been predominantly run by Roman Catholics, and a high percentage of them have been members of the Jesuit Society.
Yeah.
So, do you know who Jesuits are, Marianne?
Kind of, yes. I was raised Catholic, so I'm familiar with Jesuits.
Okay. And what can you tell me about Jesuits?
Well, they seem to be more liberal priests, I guess.
All right, so they are a male congregation in the Roman Catholic Church, as you know. And so what we're going to do is just read the Jesuit oath, okay? So have you follow along. It says,
I furthermore promise and declare that I will,
when opportunity present, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics.
I will hang, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive,
rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women in order to annihilate forever their terrible race. So, Lucas, what are your thoughts on the Jesuit oath?
Well, based on that oath, I'm not too fond of the group. I haven't really looked into what else they claim to stand for, but it's kind of concerning to have a group, like you said, so involved in Central Intelligence and everything, and being so motivated by these values.
So what are your thoughts on the Jesuit oath?
The Jesuits are pretty bad people. Sounds like they want to kill people. That's not a good thing, is it?
Jones basically was known as the Messiah from Ukiah. He hooked up with these people, and their last name is the Laytons, okay? And they said the Laytons were a well-heeled aristocratic family. Dr. Layton donated at least $250,000 to Jones. His wife's son and daughter were all members of the temple. George Blakely, who married Debbie Layton, was from a wealthy British family. He donated $60,000 to pay the lease of a 2,700 acre Guyana site in 1974. Okay, and they said Lisa Phillips Layton had come to the U.S. from a rich Hamburg banking family in Germany. Most of the top lieutenants around Jones were from wealthy, educated backgrounds, many with connections to the military or intelligence agencies. These were the people who would set up the bank accounts, complex legal actions, and financial records that put people under the temple control. So let me stop here for a second. So as you can see now, there's a sick network, global network of people who are involved in stuff like this. You can't tell me these people didn't know what was going to happen. You can't tell me this just like all of a sudden happened. You got all these aristocratic families that was involved in what was going on down in Guyana. Okay, and so far, let's piece this together. We got the CIA, which was basically founded in part by the Catholics, who, by the way, sent us off from the coast of Africa, told us to forget where we would come from, and sent us to places and from that particular part of Africa where that excerpt that I was reading from, they did go to places like Guyana, Brazil, and all that kind of stuff. And I can talk more about that in another time. But how the Catholic Church parceled out South America between Spain and Portugal, but Guyana was in part of that slave trade. So 80 to 90% of the people were black. You have them in this a camp, okay, guarded by, they didn't say mostly, all white people with guns, okay. As we're painting this picture here, the CIA is clearly behind this. The CIA was founded by the Catholic Church, okay. So these are pieces that we're just putting together, okay? All right, so let's continue. He has spent time studying and preaching methods from Father Divine in Philadelphia, and attempted to use them in a manipulative way in the streets of San Francisco. Father Divine ran a religious and charitable operation amongst Philadelphia's poor black community. So I don't have to read the rest of that, but basically what he's saying is that Jim Jones, of course, was a white guy, and you know, these white guys, they get around black people and to learn how to speak and to talk like us, and they learn what moves the crowd and all that stuff. So he got with one of the most flamboyant people at the time, Father Divine in Philadelphia, and learned his ways, took that with him, that style with him to San Francisco, where he was able to continue to build up People's Temple. So, all right, let's continue here. The pattern was to continue in San Francisco. In addition, Jones required that the members practice this mysterious white night, a mass suicide ritual that will protect them from murder in the hands of their enemies. Although the new temple had no guards or fences to restrict members, few had other places to live, and many had given over all they owned to Jones. They felt trapped inside the community that preached love but practiced hatred. So let me stop here. So if you're not familiar with all this whole story here, and some of this stuff here is, and I do understand that quite a number of people in this audience, they may not even have heard of this story. So that's why I'm taking the time to kind of go through some of these things here. But one of the things they would do in People's Temple is that they would have, as I just read, this thing called White Nights. And it was like they would sound this alarm and say, okay, y'all, we got to get ready because the enemy's coming in. He's coming in. And they would have their cups all lined up, ready to take their, to take their poison, so that they can, at any given moment, they can be prepared to go to suicide themselves, basically. So that's what they would do when they one of the things that People's Temple was known for. And people are like, some people were seeing that stuff. They was like, okay, let me get up out of here. This is crazy. But sadly, you had a lot of people who said, nah, this is a revolutionary act and we need to do this.
From his throne in the center of Jonestown, he ordered the suicides to begin. There would be no more white nights.
They invaded our privacy. They came into our home. They followed us 6,000 miles away. The Red Brigade showed them justice. The congressman's dead. Please get some medication. It's simple. There's no convulsions with it. It's just simple. Just please get it before it's too late.
They would draw up an amount in the syringes, and he had babies and children go first. Then they would swallow it and then give them a small drink of punch to wash it down.
The will is the will of sovereign being that this happened to us. That we lay down our lives in protest against what's been done.
Parents were talking to their children, and a lot of the children were crying. He was telling them not to tell the children that they were dying, not to tell them it was painful, and that people had to die with dignity.
Die with a degree of dignity. Lay down your life with dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony.
He sounded very calm. He didn't seem excited. He was very calm.
It is not to be feared. It's a friend. It's a friend. You're sitting there. Show your love for one another. Let's get calm. Let's get calm.
People were standing around in groups, saying goodbye to each other, walking around hugging old friends and stuff like that. Children were crying. They were going through convulsions, and some of the grandparents and parents were, getting hysterical as they saw the children die. But basically, a lot of the people were sitting, especially the senior people, were just sitting and just waiting or watching.
Be patient, be patient. I tell you, I don't care how many screams you hear, I don't care how many anguished cries. Death is 1,000,000 times preferable to 10 more days of this life.
The children died first, many in the arms of their parents or other adults. Then the adults followed, often lying down or falling on top of the children. Soon it was over.
Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so for undisclosed reasons, Jones had and used doubles. This was very unusual for a religious leader, but quite common in intelligence operations. Even the death and identification of Jones was peculiar. He was apparently shot by another person in the camp. Photos of his body do not show the identifying tattoos on his chest. The body and face are not clearly recognizable due to the bloating and discoloration. The FBI reportedly checked his fingerprints twice, a seemingly futile gesture since it is a precise operation. A more logical route would have been to check his dental records. Several researchers familiar with the case feel that the body may not have been Jones. Okay, so they're going with there. So basically they're saying that may not even been him in the first place. Okay, now, I told y'all it's going to be a lot of information here, okay? And then we're going to bring it all together. Okay, so now they're talking about Jonestown itself. They said his final choice, the The Matthews Ridge section of Guyana is an interesting one. It was originally the site of a Union Carbide bauxite and manganese mine. And and Jones used the dock they left behind. At an earlier point, it had been one of the 7 possible sites chosen for the relocation of the Jews after World War II. Plans to inhabit the jungles of Guyana interior with cheap labor dates back to 1919. Resources buried there are among the richest in the world and include manganese, diamonds, gold, bauxite, and uranium. Forbes Burnham, the prime minister, had participated in a scheme to repatriate blacks from the UK to work in that area. Like all earlier attempts, it failed. So there was an earlier attempt to get blacks down there, to repatriate them from the UK, send them down there again as a new slavery, so to speak, to work in the mines and stuff down there. So this particular spot that Jonestown ended up being was not an accident at all. It has a history there. Okay, next section. When they arrived at the airport, the blacks were taken off of the plane. Listen to this now. The blacks were taken off of the plane, bound and gagged. The deception had finally been stripped bare of all pretense. The blacks were so isolated and controlled that neighbors as close as 5 miles from the site did not know that blacks lived at Jonestown. The only public representatives seen in Guyana were all white. Guyanese children were bought also. Okay, it's all gonna lead somewhere, y'all. According to the survivors' reports, they entered a virtual slave labor camp. Worked for 16 to 18 hours daily, they were forced to live in cramped quarters or minimum rations. Let me stop there. So what does that sound like to you? Guarded by a bunch of white people with guns, black people being bound up, working at a slave labor camp. Well, that's slavery. Okay. Let's see. They were forced to live in cramped quarters on minimum rations, usually rice and bread, and sometimes rancid meat. Kept on a schedule of physical and mental exhaustion. They were also forced to stay awake at night and listen to lectures by Jones. Threats and abuse became more common. The camp medical staff under Dr. Lawrence Schnack was known to perform painful suturing without anesthesia. They administered drugs and kept daily medical records. Infractions of the rules or disloyalty led to increasingly harsh punishments, including forced drugging, sensory isolation in an underground box, physical torture, and public sexual rape and humiliation. Beatings and verbal abuse were commonplace. Only the special guards were treated humanely and fed decently. People with serious injuries were flown out, but few ever returned. Okay, and he gets the German word, and he says, they said they should have used this as a motto: work will make you free. Guyana even considered setting up an Auschwitz-like museum at the site, but abandoned the idea. Now, you see this, you guys? They set up a modern slavery. It was a modern slavery setup down there. And what they were doing was actually recreating slavery. What all those things that you hear, that you see going on down there, this wasn't some kind of random kind of thing that a bunch of religious zealots or whatever, they just got together and were just acting stupid. No. The fact that you got these top doctors down there every day with monitoring their they were getting physical examinations every day. And this was in other accounts that I read. Every day, every person a part of that camp would get a small cup of medications, pharmaceuticals, and they had to take those every day. Now, where did they get the money for all that from? You know, Jim Jones, basically, they said estimated between $26 million to $2 billion, and he had money scattered in accounts all throughout the world, like all over the place, Swiss bank accounts, all this stuff. So he wasn't crazy, y'all. Okay, they tried to make like he was crazy. He was not crazy. Inside Guyana itself, now listen to this part. Approximately 25 miles to the south of Matthews Ridge is a community called Hilltown. named after religious leader Rabbi Hill. Hill has used the names Abraham Israel and Rabbi Emmanuel Washington. Hilltown, set up about the same time as Jonestown, followed the departure of David Hill, who was known in Cleveland. A fugitive of the U.S. courts, Hill rules with an iron fist over some 8,000 black people from Guyana and America, who believe they are the lost tribes of Israel and the real Hebrews of biblical prophecy. Used as strong-armed troops and internal mercenaries to ensure Burnham's election, as well as were Jonestown members, the Hilltown people were allowed to clear the Jonestown site of shoes and unused weapons, both in short supply in Guyana. So here we already had another camp in that area as well that was sound just as crazy as Jonestown. And it's interesting that this guy happened to be, he considers himself a Hebrew Israelite, and he said he had 8,000 people as well in this area, mostly Guyanese people.
Traditional expression of mission is still evident in South America. Guyana has been part of the British province for 150 years. Whether working in the remote interior of the country or in the cities, the work is the same, helping people to find God.
And there's a nice gate, isn't it?
Going where the needs are greatest means that some Jesuits are required to work in parishes. Bob Barrow and Derek Maitland are both parish priests in East Guyana.
To Teresa of the Missions, we got Jesus, the Sacred Heart, up there, Lord. We got all the Stations of the Cross, and we have. When I came out here in '63, there were over 60 Jesuits in Guyana, and the bishop was a Jesuit, and the provincial and bishop and all of it ran things. They said, "You do this," so I went to try to do that, and then they said, "Well, you're no good at doing that. We'll move you somewhere else." Well, I was quite happy with that.
A bishop might be forgiven if he's thought, well, the best thing is he's got to find priests to man all his parishes. But as Jesuits, I think, we would be looking at that, but also looking at other things. Perhaps other orders are called more to contemplation, to prayer. We are called to that, but we are called to do it very much in the hub of activity. The phrase we use is to be contemplatives in action.
Jim Jones was a Jesuit under that secret oath, with instructions from Rome to commit mass murder in order to discredit the Christian camps. According to Alberto, the cry went up that politicians should pass laws forbidding groups from setting up retreats. This way, Bible believers would have to hide when the great wave of persecution from Rome begins. Let me ask you something at this point. Let's just stop here for a second. What's the chances that a crazy preacher would have gathered the slim demographic of black folks who may be suicidal in one place? What's the chances of that happening? But black people on our own, we don't commit suicide like that, okay? The other thing I wanted to bring out too with this before I get to the next slide is that when you look at this whole thing here, this whole operation, there's something about black people, okay? And this is what I was touching on earlier. No matter how low we get, we don't break like that. You know, and when I mean break like that, I mean in terms of suicide. We don't do that. In a general sense, okay? Again, I'm not saying no black people commit suicide. I'm saying in a general sense, black folks don't do that. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You remember I was saying, I was talking about white people and some of the things that they do or whatever. And it's with black people, there's some differences with us as well. And you got to think for a second that there are people who sit back and look at black people. We've been through slavery, we've been through Jim Crow, we've been through all this mistreatment all throughout these years. It would seem as if the suicide rate would be pretty high. But it's not. Guess where the suicide rate, who has the highest suicide rate? Well, not according to this chart, but white people who are the most privileged in this society have a much higher suicide rate than we have. So for any psychiatrists out there, anybody who studies psychology, that would be a very interesting case study to perform, wouldn't it? How is it that black people can go through all this stuff and not be driven to that point, but yet white people who seemingly have everything, they tend to be more suicidal? It's very interesting, you know. And I think, and that's why I believe this whole Jonestown thing, it was an exercise to get us. They wanted to know how much we can take as a black person, as black people, how much we can take that until we can get broken, until we can, what it takes to break a black person. I think that's what it was, you know, based on what we're seeing here. This whole exercise was about how much we can take as black people in order to be completely broken to the point where we would just rush to commit suicide. Now, as we said earlier with Dr. Mutu, the Guyane doctor that was down there, he said he looked at a good percentage of the bodies, and he said that based on what he saw, only 3 of them had needle marks. All the rest of them had gunshots. So even then, you have black people, it's like I said again, the media saying they all went down there and drank the Kool-Aid and committed suicide. That wasn't what happened. I just went through an exhaustive reading there, showing you just all the stuff, the fallacies in that narrative, in that media narrative. Here's another interesting tidbit. Guess which country has been near or top of the list of suicides? Take a look. It's Guyana. Isn't that interesting? Guyana has the highest rate of suicides, but it just so happens to be the site of not just one, but several CIA locations where they do this kind of stuff, according to what we just read. Very interesting.
Thank you for watching False Camera Action. Before you go anywhere, don't forget to click subscribe.